My stepmother forbade me from attending my father's funeral. A week later, she informed me that I wasn't invited to the reading of his will either. She laughed directly in my face and declared, "Only those who truly belong are permitted." Here, in that instant, I decided not to argue, not to raise my voice, not to give her the reaction she craved. Instead, I calmly passed a sealed envelope to the lawyer, the final gift my father had ever given me. As the lawyer opened it and began to read, the room fell completely silent. No one anticipated what was about to unfold. I let those words linger in the air for a moment, heavy and sharp, like the strike of a gavel. The audience immediately senses the betrayal at the core of my story. They understand I've been humiliated, cast aside, yet I hold something that will upend everything. Before we even revisit the beginning, I bring the key figures into focus so the audience grasps what's truly at stake. My name is Ethan Wade. I am my father's only child. I grew up believing family meant loyalty, respect, and love. But when my father remarried, everything I thought I knew about family began to unravel. His new wife, Claudia, entered our lives with a charming smile and polished demeanor, but beneath the surface, she was cold and manipulative. To her, I was nothing more than a reminder of the life my father had before she came along. Claudia had 2 children of her own, Troy and Sierra. Troy, at 23, was the type who never held a real job, but acted as if the world owed him everything. Sierra, at 20, had a sharp tongue like her mother's, always sneering from the corner of the room, quick to mock and even quicker to follow Claudia's lead. And then there was my father, Henry Wade, a strong man, a successful businessman, someone who once taught me how to ride a bike, how to shake a hand firmly, and how to face life without fear. But the man I knew began to fade after Claudia entered the picture. He became distant, withdrawn, as if he were living under a shadow. That's who we were. That's the family that sat divided around my father's memory. And that's where the story begins, with a son who just wanted to say goodbye, and a stepmother who decided I wasn't worthy of even that. The hook ends here, leaving the audience burning with questions. Why did Claudia despise me so much? Why did my father allow her to push me away? What was inside that sealed envelope that made her expression collapse? I grew up as my father's pride and joy. Henry Wade was more than a parent to me. He was a mentor, a protector, and the person I measured myself against. I remember him holding the back of my bike seat until I found my balance, running beside me, his booming laughter making me feel invincible. I recall him teaching me how to throw a baseball, how to look someone in the eye and shake their hand, and how to keep my word no matter what. For most of my childhood, I believed nothing could shake our bond. That changed when Claudia walked into our lives. My father met her after my mother passed away. I was in my early 20s then, and grief had left me vulnerable and unsteady. Claudia seemed charming at first. She had a polished smile, the kind you'd see in magazines, and she spoke to my father with a gentleness that drew him in. I wanted to believe she could make him happy again. I wanted to trust her. For a short time, I even tried, but the cracks appeared quickly. It started with small things. She would interrupt me whenever I spoke to my father, inserting herself into the conversation as if I weren't there. When I came over for dinner, she made little remarks about how I should call ahead before showing up, as if I were an uninvited guest. Then came the sharper jabs. One evening, while my father was in the kitchen, she leaned toward me at the table and whispered, "You'll always remind him of the woman he lost. He doesn't need that kind of pain." Her words cut deep, but what hurt more was how my father seemed to drift further into her influence with each passing month. She had 2 children of her own, Troy and Sierra, and they quickly began to treat the house as if it were their kingdom. Troy strutted around like royalty, never holding a job. never contributing, yet always sporting the latest watch or phone. Sierra, younger but just as entitled, followed Claudia's lead. She rolled her eyes at me, muttered insults under her breath, and acted as if I were an outsider in the home where I had grown up. My father wasn't blind. I saw the hesitation in his eyes sometimes, the flicker of guilt when Claudia brushed me aside, but he never spoke up. Maybe he thought he was keeping the peace. Maybe he was just tired. I don't know. All I know is that with each passing year, I felt him slipping further away. I would call, and Claudia would answer instead, saying he was too busy or too tired. I would try to plan a fishing trip, but somehow something always came up. Eventually, I stopped asking Dot when my father's health began to decline. I didn't hear about it from him but through a distant cousin who happened to run into them at the hospital. I showed up the next day, anxious and desperate to see him, but Claudia met me at the door. She crossed her arms and said, "He doesn't need stress right now. He needs rest, not old wounds." I tried to step around her, but she blocked my path. I will never forget the cold look in her eyes as she said, "You're not helping him. You're only helping yourself." That was the moment I realized I was losing him not just to illness, but to her control. Still, I clung to the hope that my father knew I cared, that somewhere inside he understood how much I loved him. I sent letters, left voicemails, and tried every way I could to reach him. Sometimes I heard back a quick message or a short note. They were never long, but they carried his voice, his handwriting, and that was enough to remind me of the bond we once had. The day I got the call that he had passed, I sat in my car for an hour before I could even move. My chest felt hollow, as if the air had been knocked out of me. I thought of all the chances I had lost, all the words I never got to say. I told myself I would make it right at the funeral. I would stand at his side one last time, honor him, and remind the world that I was his son. But even then, Claudia found a way to twist the knife. When I arrived at the church, dressed in black and holding a bouquet of white lily, she was waiting on the steps. She looked me up and down as if I were a stranger. Her children flanked her like guards. She didn't lower her voice when she spoke. She wanted the crowd to hear. "You're not welcome here, Ethan. This funeral is for family. Real family." The words hit me harder than I expected. People turned their heads. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered. I stood there frozen, holding flowers that suddenly felt heavy in my hands. My throat burned, but I refused to let her see me break. I set the bouquet down on the steps, turned, and walked away. That night I sat alone in my apartment and stared at the ceiling. Grief consumed me, but beneath it, something else was growing, a quiet determination. I knew my father had loved me, no matter what Claudia said. And I knew the story wasn't over. The week after the funeral was the hardest of my life. Grief had settled into me like a storm that refused to pass. I kept replaying those final moments at the church, standing outside like an unwelcome guest while strangers buried my father. I should have been there. I should have said goodbye. Instead, I was left with shame and rage twisting inside me, both battling for control. I tried to move forward, but Claudia made sure I couldn't. The day after the funeral, I received a short message from a law office. It was an official notice about the reading of my father's will. I felt a surge of relief. No matter what Claudia thought of me, she couldn't erase me from the law. I was Henry Wade's only son, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase me from his bloodline. I arrived at the law office a few minutes early, dressed in a black suit that still carried the faint scent of mothballs from the closet where it had been stored for years. My palms were sweating, but I held my head high as I walked through the glass doors. The receptionist looked up, and I gave her my name. She checked her list, then frowned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wade. Your name isn't on the guest list." My chest tightened. That can't be right. I'm his son." Before she could respond, a sharp, mocking laugh cut through the air Claudia's voice. She stepped out from the waiting area as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly styled, her expression dripping with smug satisfaction. Troy and Sierra stood just behind her, leaning against the wall like bodyguards. Claudia tilted her head and smiled at me with the cruelty only she could deliver. "Ethan, what are you doing here? This isn't for you. This is for Henry's family." My hands curled into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. I am his family. I'm his only son. Troy chuckled. "Sure doesn't look that way." "To us." Sierra crossed her arms. "Maybe you should take the hint and leave before you embarrass yourself." Every word stung like acid, but I refused to back down. I turned to the receptionist again. "My father was Henry Wade. You cannot hold a will reading without me." The receptionist looked uncertain, glancing from me to Claudia. Claudia placed a hand on the desk and leaned in, her voice icy. "Don't listen to him. Henry made it very clear who mattered to him in the end. This boy hasn't been part of his life in years. He's nothing but an intruder." The word burned. I was 34 years old, yet she used it like a weapon. To diminish me, to erase me. My heart pounded, and for a moment I almost lost control. I almost shouted, almost let the rage spill out. But then I felt the weight in my jacket pocket, the sealed envelope. I remembered the night my father pressed it into my hand, his grip weak but determined. His voice was shaky, but his eyes were steady. "Son, no matter what happens, you are mine. Keep this safe. Use it when the time comes." I hadn't known what he meant then, but standing there in that law office, facing Claudia's smug smile, I knew the time had come. I straightened my shoulders and looked Claudia in the eye. "You can laugh all you want, but I'm not leaving." Her smile widened. "Then by all means, make a fool of yourself. You'll see soon enough where you stand." The lawyer appeared. In the doorway, an older man with gray hair and sharp glasses. He called out, "We're ready to begin." Claudia swept past me with Troy and Sierra trailing behind her. As she passed, she leaned close enough for me to hear her whisper, "Prepare yourself, Ethan. You're about to learn what your father really thought of you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My hand brushed against the envelope in my pocket, and that was enough to steady me. Inside the conference room, the air was thick with tension. Claudia and her children settled into leather chairs around the polished oak table. I sat at the far end, their eyes boring into me as if I were trespassing. Claudia crossed her legs and leaned back, her expression smug, as if she were already celebrating her victory. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We are here to review the last will and testament of Henry Wade." Claudia smirked in my direction. "Let's get this over with. Some of us actually belong here." I stayed silent. My heart raced, but I kept my face calm. I knew something she didn't. The lawyer opened a folder and began reading the formal introduction. The words washed over me, legal language and procedural details, but my focus remained on the envelope. I could feel Claudia's eyes flicking toward me, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to storm out. Instead, I sat perfectly still, waiting for the moment. That was the conflict in its purest form, a son fighting not just for his father's memory, but for his place in a family that wanted him erased. Claudia thought she had the upper hand. She thought her cruelty would break me. What she didn't know was that my father had given me a weapon she could never take away, and when the time came, I was ready to use it. The lawyer's voice droned on as he read the opening of the will, the formal language heavy and detached. My eyes stayed fixed on the polished oak table in front of me, but inside, every nerve in my body was on fire. Claudia sat across from me, her lips curled into a satisfied smirk, one manicured hand resting lazily on the arm of her chair. Troy leaned back with his arms crossed, his expression smug, while Sierra kept whispering little comments into her mother's ear, both of them occasionally glancing my way with mocking smiles. To anyone else in the room, I must have looked like I was barely holding myself together, the estranged son hoping for crumbs from his father's estate. That was exactly what Claudia wanted, and she believed the reading of the will would finally humiliate me into silence. But she had no idea what I was holding in my pocket, remembered the moment my father gave it to me as clearly as if it were happening again. It was late at night, and I had gone to see him against Claudia's wishes. His health had been declining, and I knew my chances of seeing him were slipping away. He was sitting in a chair by the window, his face thin and pale, but his eyes still carried the same weight they always had when he wanted me to listen carefully. "Ethan," he said, his voice weak but steady, "I know things have been difficult. I know Claudia has done everything she can to push you aside, but you are my son. That will never change." I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears I refused to let him see. He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a sealed envelope. He pressed it into my hand and held it there for a moment. His grip wasn't strong anymore, but there was intent in it, something that told me he meant every word. "Keep this safe. Do not open it. When the time comes, you will know what to do." I looked at him, confused, but he gave a small shake of his head. "Trust me, son. You'll understand." Those were some of the last words he spoke directly to me. At the time, I had no idea what the envelope contained or why he had chosen to give it to me in secret. But now, as Claudia sat across from me, ready to erase me from my father's legacy, I understood perfectly. The lawyer began reading the initial allocations: a trust fund for Claudia, a modest allowance for her children, control of household items, and smaller investments. Claudia's face gleamed as though each word was music to her ears. She leaned forward slightly, clearly anticipating more. I waited patiently. My pulse raced, but my resolve was clear. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to honor my father's last request. When the lawyer paused to shuffle his papers, I reached into my jacket pocket. The crinkle of the envelope felt like thunder to me. I placed it gently on the table and slid it forward toward him. "I have something," I said, my voice calm, but firm. "My father gave me this before he died. He asked me to make sure it was read here today." The lawyer looked up, startled. Claudia let out a sharp laugh, the kind meant to wound. "Oh, for heaven's sake, what is this now? Some childish attempt to steal attention?" Troy snorted. "Pathetic." Sierra rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Ethan, you should know when to quit." I didn't look at them. I kept my gaze locked on the lawyer, who was holding the envelope now, his brow furrowed as he examined it. The envelope bore my father's handwriting, his full name signed across the seal. "This is authentic," the lawyer murmured. He pulled on a pair of reading glasses and carefully opened it. The sound of the paper tearing filled the silence in the room. Claudia's smirk faltered for the first time. "What is that?" she demanded. The lawyer raised his hand to quiet her as he unfolded the document inside. He scanned the page, his eyes moving quickly, then more slowly, his mouth tightening. He cleared his throat. Claudia leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Well, what is it?" I sat back in my chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap, though my heart pounded like a drum. This was the moment my father had prepared me for. This was the reason he had trusted me to hold on to his final words. The lawyer's voice took on a different tone as he began to read aloud, no longer detached and procedural, but deliberate, heavy with significance. The words belonged to my father, not to legal jargon or court protocol. To my son, Ethan Wade, who has always been and will always remain my blood. I leave my estate, my business shares, and all personal possessions of value. Claudia and her children have already received more than enough of my support during my lifetime. I have chosen to leave them nothing further. This is my will and my decision, made of sound mind and body, signed and witnessed accordingly." The air in the room shifted instantly. Claudia froze. The smug expression slipped from her face like a mask tearing away. Troy's jaw dropped and Sierra's whisper died in her throat. For the first time in years, I felt my father's presence beside me, strong and undeniable. He had spoken louder in death than he ever could in those final days. And he had spoken. For me, I stayed silent, letting the words settle like stones on the table. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply sat there, steady and calm, just as he had told me to be. The lawyer's words echoed through the conference room like a thunderclap. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of paper as he placed the addendum back on the table. I sat still, hands folded, my pulse hammering inside my chest. My father's voice, carried through those written words, had cut through every lie Claudia had spun. He had not abandoned me. He had not forgotten me. In his final moments of clarity, he had chosen me, his son. Claudia was the first to break the silence, her chair scraping back against the floor as she shot to her feet. Her face, usually so carefully composed, was twisted with fury. She jabbed a finger toward the lawyer. "This is absurd. Henry would never do this. He loved me. He loved my children. This is some kind of forgery." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked her squarely in the eye. "Mrs. Wade, this document bears your husband's signature, notarized and filed according to legal procedure. It is authentic. I can assure you there is no forgery here." Her face went pale at his certainty, but she wasn't finished. She turned her rage on me, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You did this. You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against us." I kept my tone steady, refusing to meet her fury with more fire. I didn't make my father write those words. He made his choice. Troy slammed his fist against the table. "This is ridiculous. My mom sacrificed everything for Dad. We were there every day while you were off doing nothing. And now he just gives everything to you? That's not fair." Sierra's eyes filled with angry tears. "We're the ones who cared for him. We're the ones who stayed. You barely even visited." Their words stung because they carried a half-truth. I hadn't been there as much as I wanted to be, but the reason was sitting right in front of me. Claudia had built walls between me and my father at every turn, and her children had been the willing guards. I turned toward them and spoke firmly. "You call it caring, but you spent years taking from him. Every gift, every favor, every indulgence, you treated him like a bank, not a father. And now you're angry because he finally saw through it." The lawyer raised his hand to bring the room back to order. "This is not a matter of debate. Mr. Wade's wishes are legally binding. The estate, his business shares, and his personal assets all belong to his son, Ethan Wade. That is the final ruling of this will." The finality in his voice hit Claudia harder than any insult ever could. She sank back into her chair, her face drained of color, her lips pressed tight. For once, the sharp tongue that had cut me down so many times had nothing left to say. Troy muttered under his breath, pacing the length of the room, while Sierra buried her face in her hands, disbelief written in every movement. They had spent years mocking me, dismissing me, making me feel like a ghost in my father's life. And in a single moment, that power was gone. I felt no joy in their downfall, only a deep, quiet relief. My father's words had given me back my place, not just in his estate, but in his heart. The weight I had been carrying since the day Claudia barred me from his funeral began to lift. Claudia tried one final strike. She leaned forward, her voice low and venomous. This isn't over. You think a piece of paper makes you stronger than me? I'll fight this. I'll make sure you regret taking what should have been ours." The lawyer closed the folder with a sharp snap. "You are welcome to pursue legal action, Mrs. Wade, but I assure you, you will lose. Your husband made his wishes very clear." Her eyes flicked to me, burning with hatred, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I kept my expression calm, steady, unshaken. My silence was more powerful than any retort. I rose from my chair, my legs steady beneath me. I gathered my things and looked once more at the lawyer, offering a small nod of gratitude. "Thank you." Then I turned toward Claudia, Troy, and Sierra. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. Their faces told the story. The smugness, the arrogance, the certainty that I would always be beneath them, it was gone. In its place was disbelief and fear of what they could no longer control. Walking out of that office was the most liberating moment of my life. The afternoon sun hit my face, warm and bright, as though the world itself had shifted in my favor. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt my father's presence, not as a fading memory, but as a steady voice that still guided me. Inside that envelope, he had left me more than property or wealth. He had left me dignity. He had left me proof that I had mattered to him all along. The climax was not about what I had gained on paper. It was about reclaiming the truth. Claudia's lies had collapsed in front of her, and my father's love had spoken louder than her cruelty ever could. And in that moment, I knew the battle was over. When I stepped out of that law office, it felt as if the weight of years had finally lifted from my shoulders. The afternoon sun shone brighter than I had seen it in months, and for the first time since my father's death, I could breathe without anger or grief choking me. The sealed envelope that had sat quietly in my pocket was now empty, but what it carried had changed everything. Claudia, Troy, and Sierra had always believed they could rewrite my father's life, turning him into nothing more than a provider for their wants while pushing me out completely. They had treated me as though I were invisible, an intruder in my own bloodline. For years I questioned myself. I wondered if maybe my father truly had stopped caring for me, if maybe I was just holding on to memories of a bond that no longer existed. That doubt was gone now. His words, written in his own hand, had shattered every lie they ever told. My father had seen me, remembered me, and chosen me when it mattered most. He had restored the bond Claudia tried to erase, and with it came a peace I had not felt in years. But peace was not the only thing left behind. Claudia's parting words echoed in my head as I walked to my car. "This isn't over." I knew. She meant it. She was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat quietly. She would fight, not because she loved my father, but because she hated losing. She would drag this through court if she could, and she would try to twist the story in her favor. I considered that as I sat behind the wheel. For years, I had allowed her to dictate the terms of my relationship with my father. She barred me from dinners, turned me away at hospital doors, and even stripped me of the chance to stand at his funeral. Each time, I chose silence rather than confrontation, hoping to keep the peace. Now I realized silence had been my greatest strength. It was the silence of patience, of discipline, of a son who did not stoop to her level. When the truth came out, my composure gave me the dignity she could never take away. I understood then that revenge was not about shouting or striking back. It was about standing tall when others expected you to crumble. The estate I inherited was significant. My father had built a business from nothing, and the properties he left behind carried both history and value. But none of that mattered as much as the simple line written in his will, "To my son, Ethan Wade, who has always been and will always remain my blood." Those words were worth more than any check, any deed, or any account. They were proof that love cannot be erased, no matter how hard someone tries. In the weeks that followed, I began to sort through his belongings. His office smelled faintly of the cologne he always wore, and his desk still held notes in his handwriting. I found photo albums Claudia had tried to shove into storage, filled with pictures of me and my father through the years, fishing trips, baseball games, birthdays, even the quiet moments at home when we sat side by side on the couch. Each photograph reminded me that the man I remembered was real, that his love had not been a dream. Going through those memories was painful, but it was also healing. For the first time since he passed, I no longer felt like I had been robbed of my father. Instead, I felt like he had given me a final gift, the chance to reclaim who we were to each other. As for Claudia and her children, they vanished from my life as quickly as they had stormed into it. I heard whispers that Claudia tried to challenge the will, but the lawyer's preparation and my father's foresight left her no ground to stand on. The more she fought, the more desperate she appeared. Eventually, her threats faded and silence replaced them. I never saw Troy or Sierra again, though part of me wondered if life would ever teach them the lesson they had refused to learn under their mother's roof. Entitlement only lasts as long as someone enables it, and my father had finally stopped. Standing in my father's study one evening, I realized the true lesson he left me. Life is not about what others try to take from you. It is about what you hold on to when the world tries to strip it away. Claudia wanted to erase me, but my father's love was not hers to rewrite. He had made mistakes, yes, but in the end, he chose to make them right. That choice gave me closure. It gave me the ability to grieve him honestly, not as the distant man I feared he had become, but as the father who loved me enough to leave behind his truth. I walked out onto the porch of his home, looking at the land he had worked for so many years, and I felt a quiet sense of resolve. I promised myself I would honor him not by clinging to bitterness, but by living with the dignity he had given back to me. So when I tell this story, I don't tell it as a tale of revenge. I tell it as proof that patience, love, and quiet strength can outlast cruelty and lies. Claudia thought she had won when she barred me from the funeral, when she mocked me at the will reading, when she sneered that I was not family. But in the end, it was my father's words, sealed in that envelope, that spoke louder than hers ever could. And that, more than anything, is what I carry with me now. That was the story of how my stepmother tried to erase me from my own father's life and how my father's final words restored the truth. I share it because I know there are others who have faced betrayal, others who have been told they don't belong, and others who have had to fight quietly for their place in the world. If you've ever felt pushed aside, remember this. Dignity and patience carry more power than cruelty ever will. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it connected with you, if you felt the weight of these moments as I did, please take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. I would love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell me what part of this story spoke to you the most. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss the next one. This is Ethan, and until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never forget the value of your own worth.